Karen had always loved attention. She believed life was about fun, excitement, and getting people to notice her. She spent hours scrolling through social media, watching prank videos, and dreaming of becoming famous. To her, the world was one big stage, and she was determined to be the star. One day, she got an idea. She would play a prank on a royal guard. It was a well-known fact that these guards never reacted, no matter what people did around them. Tourists often tried to make them smile or move, but they remained serious and still. Karen thought it would be hilarious to pull a joke on one of them, something no one had ever done before. She convinced her friends to come along, promising that it would be the funniest prank ever. They laughed and agreed. Together, they planned to visit the Grand Palace where the guards stood in their sharp uniforms, completely focused on their duty. Karen wanted to do something shocking, something that would make her video go viral instantly. Before heading out, she grabbed a plastic cup from her car. It was filled with a clear liquid, something she had picked up earlier without thinking much about it. She assumed it was just water, but in her excitement, she never bothered to check. The plan was simple. She would throw the water on the guard, make him flinch, and then run away laughing. As they arrived at the palace, Karen's heart raced with excitement. The place was crowded with tourists taking pictures and admiring the grand surroundings. The guards stood tall, their expressions unchanging. Everything was perfect. Her friends held up their phones, ready to record. This was going to be the best prank ever. Karen walked up to one of the guards, pretending to admire his uniform. Then, without warning, she tossed the liquid from the cup straight at his face. For a moment, she expected him to stand there like a statue, looking shocked but doing nothing. Instead, what happened next changed everything. The guard let out a loud cry, dropping his weapon as he stumbled backward. His hands flew to his face, and a deep, painful sound escaped his lips. The crowd gasped. People rushed forward, confused and horrified. The guard fell to his knees, his face contorted in agony. Karen stood frozen, the laughter stuck in her throat. Her friends stopped recording, their faces turning pale. The mood had shifted from fun to absolute horror in seconds. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Tourists yelled for help, and within moments, security officers rushed in. A medic team arrived, lifting the guard and carrying him away. Karen's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't a prank anymore. This was real. And she had no idea what she had just done. Karen's hands trembled as she stood frozen in place. The cheerful atmosphere around the palace had completely changed. People were no longer smiling or taking pictures. Instead, they were staring at the scene in shock. Some whispered among themselves, while others took out their phones, recording everything. The air felt heavy, and Karen could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She turned to her friends, expecting them to laugh and tell her it was just an overreaction. But their faces were pale with fear. One of them whispered, "Karen, what did you do?" That was when she started to panic. The royal guard, who had been standing tall just moments ago, was now being carried away by the medical team. His face was covered with a cloth, and he was groaning in pain. The sound made Karen's stomach twist. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her legs wouldn't move. Security officers rushed toward her, their expressions serious. "Stay right there," one of them ordered. For the first time in her life, Karen felt completely helpless. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't a simple prank gone wrong. Something was seriously wrong, and everyone was looking at her as if she was the one to blame. "I didn't mean to," Karen blurted out, stepping back. Her voice was shaky. "It was just water. I thought it was just water." But no one seemed to believe her. A woman in the crowd shouted, "That didn't look like water. Look what you did to him." Others nodded, their faces filled with anger and disgust. Karen's mind raced. Could it really have been something else? She had grabbed the cup without thinking. Had she made a terrible mistake? She wanted to explain, to make people understand, but the words wouldn't come out. Her throat felt dry. A few minutes later, police officers arrived. They moved quickly, asking questions and talking to the witnesses. One of them approached Karen. "Are you the one who threw the liquid?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Karen swallowed hard. I didn't know. I thought it was just a harmless prank," she stammered. The officer didn't look convinced. "We'll need to take you in for questioning." Karen's heart dropped. She glanced at her friends, hoping they would defend her, but they all stepped away, avoiding her eyes. They didn't want to be involved. As the officers led her toward a police car, the crowd kept watching. Some shook their heads. Others whispered to each other. Karen felt like the whole world was against her. She had wanted to be famous, but not like this. Not as the girl who ruined everything with a prank that went horribly wrong. And deep inside, a terrible fear crept in. What if she had hurt the guard in a way that could never be fixed? Karen sat in the back of the police car, her hands shaking. The bright city lights flashed past the window, but she hardly noticed them. Her mind was spinning. This wasn't supposed to happen. It was just a joke, just a harmless prank. But now she was in trouble, real trouble. When they arrived at the police station, the officers guided her inside. Everything felt unreal. The cold air, the serious faces, the sound of phones ringing. It was like she was in a bad dream. She kept telling herself that someone would understand, that this was all just a big mistake. But deep down, fear gripped her heart. They placed her in a small room with white walls and a single table. A camera in the corner blinked with a red light. Karen swallowed hard. This was real. This was serious. After a few minutes, a police officer walked in, holding a file. He sat down across from her and opened it, flipping through some papers. "Karen, do you understand why you're here?" he asked, looking straight at her. She nodded slowly. "Yes, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said quickly. "I thought it was just water. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." The officer sighed and slid a tablet across the table. "We've reviewed the footage. Do you want to see what happened?" Karen hesitated, but curiosity got the best of her. She picked up the tablet and pressed play. The video showed everything, her laughing with her friends, holding the cup, walking up to the guard. And then, the moment she threw the liquid, the way the guard screamed, the way he clutched his face in pain, the way everyone reacted in shock. Karen's stomach twisted. It looked worse than she remembered. She set the tablet down, her hands trembling. I didn't know," she whispered. The officer leaned forward. "That liquid wasn't water, Karen. It was a harmful chemical. The guard is in the hospital right now, and he's in serious condition." Karen felt her chest tighten. "Will he be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer's expression didn't change. "We don't know yet, but I'll tell you this. The entire country is watching this case. The video has gone viral. People are outraged. The royal family has already responded, saying they want full justice." Karen's heart pounded. Viral? She had always wanted to be famous, but not like this. Not for something so terrible. "I swear, I didn't know," she said again, tears forming in her eyes. The officer shook his head. "That doesn't change what happened. We're charging you with a serious crime." Karen felt like the walls were closing in. Her life, her dreams, everything was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, reporters knocking on the door of her family's home, and endless legal paperwork. Karen's once normal life had been turned upside down. News outlets all over the world were covering the story. She had become infamous overnight, not for her humor or her pranks, but for a cruel joke that had gone terribly wrong. Her trial was set quickly. The charges were serious. Aggravated assault with a dangerous substance. The royal guard, whose life she had changed forever, was still in the hospital, his condition uncertain. Karen's mind raced with fear. What if the guard couldn't recover? What if he lost his ability to see or live the life he had before? In the courtroom, everything felt surreal. The room was full of tension. The judge, dressed in his long black robe, sat at the front, his face serious and unreadable. Karen sat beside her lawyer, trying to appear calm, but inside she was shaking. She knew what was coming, but she didn't know how to stop it. The prosecution presented the evidence first. They showed the viral video over and over again, making it clear that the act was intentional. Karen had been seen laughing and encouraging her friends to film the prank. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that she had meant to cause a scene, but they also argued that she had no idea what kind of damage the liquid could cause. Karen's lawyer spoke next, trying to explain her side of the story. This was not a malicious act, he argued. She never intended to hurt anyone. This was a mistake, an accident. Karen never meant to cause harm, and she is deeply sorry for the consequences. But no matter what her lawyer said, Karen felt the weight of the situation grow heavier. The judge's eyes were fixed on her, and she could feel the anger in the room. The guard, though he wasn't physically present, was represented by a lawyer who spoke about the lasting effects the attack had on him. He talked about the physical pain, the surgeries, and the emotional trauma the guard had endured. The lawyer made it clear that the guard's life had been changed forever. When it was time for Karen to speak, she took a deep breath. She stood up, her legs trembling. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice quiet but full of regret. "It was a joke that went wrong. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I'm so sorry. I will carry this with me for the rest of my life." But her apology didn't seem to reach the people in the courtroom. The judge looked at her without any sign of mercy, and the jury exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Karen could feel the weight of their judgment, and it made her stomach turn. When the verdict finally came, it wasn't a surprise. The jury found Karen guilty of aggravated assault, and the judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. The courtroom fell silent as the judge banged his gavel. Karen's heart sank. She had always dreamed of making a name for herself, but she never imagined it would be like this. As the guards led her out of the courtroom, Karen glanced one last time at the people who had been watching her family, her friends, and the public who had once admired her. Now she was nothing more than a criminal. She could barely hold her head up, knowing that her life would never be the same again. Karen sat quietly in her prison cell, staring at the cold walls around her. The reality of what had happened began to sink in, and it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her life, as she had once known it, was over. The day she had thrown that liquid at the Royal Guard felt like a distant memory now, but the consequences of that moment were all too real. Her friends had all distanced themselves. She hadn't heard from anyone since the trial. Her phone had been taken away when she entered prison, and social media, which had once been a source of constant attention, now seemed like something from another life. Karen had gone from being a somewhat popular figure to a name that everyone knew for all the wrong reasons. The prison was nothing like what she had imagined. The cold, harsh environment was a far cry from the world of social media and fame she had once known. It wasn't glamorous or fun. The other inmates barely acknowledged her, and when they did, it was with judgment in their eyes. Karen's reputation had preceded her, and to them, she wasn't just another prisoner. She was the woman who had hurt someone for a joke, and no one forgave her for that. The days blended together, and the loneliness was overwhelming. Karen spent most of her time in her cell, staring out the small window, watching the world go by. She missed the outside world, the feeling of freedom, and the excitement of creating new content. But there was no chance of any of that now. Her social media following had disappeared, and no one cared about her pranks anymore. She had no followers, no likes, no comments. One afternoon, a prison counselor came to visit her. Karen had been assigned to a rehabilitation program in hopes of helping her reflect on her actions and understand the full impact of what she had done. The counselor, a kind woman in her late 40s, sat down across from Karen and asked her how she was doing. "I don't know how to fix this," Karen said quietly, her voice filled with regret. "Everything is ruined. I've ruined everything." The counselor gave her a sympathetic smile. "It's not easy, Karen, but this is a chance to grow. You have time now to think, to learn, and to start making amends for the harm you've caused." Karen didn't respond at first. She wasn't sure if she could ever fix what she had done. How could she? The guard, the people she had let down, and the way the world now saw her. How could she make up for all of that? But the counselor's words lingered with her. Maybe she could try to be better, even if it was too late for forgiveness. Maybe, even in the darkness of her situation, there was still a way forward. In the coming months, Karen started to attend the rehabilitation classes. She listened to the stories of others who had made mistakes and tried to find ways to improve their lives. Slowly, she began to understand the damage she had caused, not just to the guard, but to herself. She had been so focused on getting attention, on being seen, that she had never stopped to think about the consequences of her actions. But now, there was no turning back. She had to live with the choices she had made, and all she could do was try to become a better person, even if the world would never forgive her. Life behind bars was harder than Karen had ever imagined. The prison walls, the constant noise, and the sharp feeling of isolation were things she had never experienced before. Each day was a struggle to stay focused, to fight the overwhelming loneliness. She spent long hours in her cell, looking out the small window, wishing she could turn back time. In the beginning, Karen had thought prison would be just another setback, something she could get through quickly. But it wasn't like she had imagined at all. Every morning, she was woken up early by the harsh sounds of the cell doors slamming and the loud voices of the other inmates. The routine was rigid and unforgiving. There was no room for mistakes, no space to escape. The other prisoners didn't care about her apologies or the remorse she felt. To them, she was just another person in the system, another name lost in a sea of faces. Some of them whispered about her, some ignored her completely, and others made it clear they didn't want anything to do with her. Karen quickly learned that she had no one to rely on except herself. The hardest part was the realization that her world had become so small. No phone, no internet, no friends outside the prison walls. The life she had once led, filled with social media and attention, now seemed like a distant memory. Her former followers, the people who had once adored her pranks, were gone. They had moved on, forgetting about Karen as quickly as they had discovered her. She spent her days in the prison's rehabilitation program, trying to find meaning in what she had done and searching for a way to better herself. Some of the other prisoners were willing to talk, and she listened to their stories with a sense of growing understanding. Many of them had made mistakes, just like her, and had spent years trying to figure out who they were and how to move forward. But Karen couldn't escape the guilt. Every time she thought about the Royal Guard, about the pain she had caused, she felt a knot tighten in her chest. His life had been changed forever, and she had been the one who caused it. Even though she had apologized and expressed her remorse, it didn't feel like enough. She wasn't sure if it ever could be. The days began to pass in a blur, but there were moments when Karen allowed herself to look forward. During one of the classes, she found herself thinking about the future. What would life be like when she finally got out? Would she ever be able to rebuild her reputation? Could she ever redeem herself for the terrible mistake she had made? She tried not to get her hopes up. After all, the world outside might never forgive her. But Karen knew that she couldn't let that stop her from trying. She had spent too much of her life chasing the wrong things, seeking fame and approval from strangers online. Now all she had was herself, and that's what she needed to focus on. As the months went on, Karen began to change, even if the world around her hadn't. She started reading books, working on self-reflection, and slowly learning how to let go of the anger and regret that had weighed her down. It wasn't easy, and there were days when she wanted to give up. But for the first time in a long time, Karen felt like she was taking responsibility for her actions. She couldn't undo the past, but she could make the future better, even if it meant starting from nothing. The months in prison started to feel less like a punishment and more like a long, hard journey toward redemption. Karen had learned to accept the harshness of her surroundings, and though the guilt never fully left her, she began to understand how she could take control of her own future, no matter how difficult it seemed. Each day, she worked on herself, reading books, taking part in therapy sessions, and listening to others' stories. She wasn't sure if the world would ever forgive her, but she knew that she had to forgive herself first. One day, Karen was given an opportunity she hadn't expected. The prison had a program where inmates could participate in a restorative justice workshop, a way for offenders to understand the real impact of their actions and attempt to make amends. It was a long shot, but Karen decided to sign up. She didn't know how it would help her, but the idea of taking real responsibility for what she had done, of facing the consequences head-on, felt like a step in the right direction. The workshop was intense. Karen was placed in a group with several other inmates, each with their own story of regret and pain. There was a man who had stolen from his family, a woman who had hurt someone in a moment of rage, and another who had spent years hiding from the truth of her actions. They all shared their stories, some with tears, others with anger, but all of them were searching for some kind of healing. When it was Karen's turn, she felt the weight of the room's attention on her. Everyone was quiet, waiting for her to speak. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I never thought about the consequences of my actions," she began, her voice shaky at first. "I always just wanted to be the center of attention. I thought that if I could make people laugh or get a lot of views, I'd be happy. But I never stopped to think about the harm I was causing. When I threw that liquid at the guard, I wasn't thinking about him or the damage I could cause. And now I know that I ruined his life. And mine too." The group listened, and for the first time in months, Karen felt like they truly understood. She had said the words she needed to say, not just to the group, but to herself. She had admitted that she had hurt someone deeply, and that hurt was something she would carry forever. But the act of sharing, of facing that truth, was the beginning of her healing. As the weeks went by, Karen started to feel a shift in herself. She was no longer running from the consequences of her actions. She had spent so much of her life pretending to be someone she wasn't, hiding behind jokes and attention-seeking behavior. But now she was learning how to be vulnerable, how to take responsibility, and how to change. Though the world outside was still waiting for her, Karen didn't think about fame or social media anymore. Her life had been turned upside down, and in some ways, that had been the wake-up call she needed. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the path to becoming a person who could make a real difference, someone who could truly own up to her mistakes and try to right the wrongs she had committed. It wasn't going to be easy, and Karen knew it might take years to rebuild anything. But she also knew that she had to keep moving forward, step by step. Every choice, every action, no matter how small, was part of a bigger story, a story she was finally ready to write. Years passed, and Karen's life in prison slowly began to change. What once felt like an endless punishment now felt like an opportunity for growth. Every day, she took small steps toward becoming a better person, learning from the mistakes she had made and finding new ways to rebuild her life, even in the darkest of places. Her time in prison was no longer just about serving a sentence. It had become a journey of self-discovery. Karen started to develop a deep understanding of the hurt she had caused, not just to the guard, but to everyone who had once looked up to her. She realized that her desire for attention had led her down a dangerous path, one where she had forgotten what really mattered: kindness, respect, and responsibility. Through the rehabilitation programs and her personal reflections, Karen began to see the world in a new light. She still thought about the Royal Guard and the pain she had caused, but instead of focusing on her guilt, she tried to focus on what she could do to move forward. She learned that change wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it and using it to shape a better future. One day, Karen received a letter. It was from the Royal Guard, or rather from his lawyer. Karen's heart skipped a beat as she read the words on the page. The guard had recovered. Though he still struggled with the emotional and physical effects of the incident, he had forgiven her. The letter didn't excuse her actions, but it offered her a sense of peace. I don't think anyone can truly understand the impact of their actions until they have faced the consequences. The letter read, "But I believe in second chances, Karen. I hope that you can find a way to make things right, not just for me, but for yourself as well. I have forgiven you, and I hope you can forgive yourself." Reading those words brought Karen to tears. She had always wondered if the guard would ever forgive her. And now she had her answer. It was the first time in years that she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make amends, to rebuild a life that was no longer centered on fame or approval, but on true redemption. By the time Karen was released from prison, she was no longer the person she once was. She had spent her time reflecting, learning, and growing. The world outside had changed, and so had she. No longer focused on the fleeting attention of social media, Karen knew that she had to work hard to regain the trust of those she had let down. She started small. She reached out to the families of other victims of crimes, offering support and sharing her own story of regret and growth. She volunteered at local shelters, helping those who had nowhere else to turn. Karen knew that the road ahead would be long, but she was ready to face it. Though her name still echoed through the media, it was no longer for the wrong reasons. Slowly, Karen began to rebuild her life, one act of kindness at a time. She didn't know what the future held, but she had learned that the true measure of success wasn't in the number of followers or likes, but in the lives she could touch, the lives she could change for the better. Karen had learned the hard way, but she had learned, and now she was ready to live a life that truly mattered.